Welcome to Succeeding at Work. I'm Dr. Brett Blair, and joining me today is my co host, Alan Geis. Hey, Alan, it's great to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Brett. Great to be here.
Hey, our expert today is Brook Houchens. Brook is the founder and the CEO of Converge Advisory Group. Brook advises leaders, boards, and organizations on leadership effectiveness, on organizational performance, on governance, and on talent strategy. And she spent more than 2 decades helping organizations diagnose complex people and performance challenges and build practical solutions that drive results. So, Brooke, welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. Hey, today's conversation is going to focus on one of the most important responsibilities of leadership, and that is diagnosing underperformance. When people begin to struggle, it's tempting to assume that the issue lies within the individual. But high performing leaders know that performance is usually shaped by much more than talent alone. Leadership, communication, systems, expectations, and culture, they all play a role. So today we're going to discuss how to identify whether an issue is structural or individual, and why curiosity, not judgment, is the first step toward building healthier, higher performing teams.
Yeah, Brett, I think one of the biggest traps leaders fall into today is in treating every performance issue like it's a people issue. Sometimes the person isn't just failing, the system is failing. If expectations aren't clear, priorities keep changing, or people don't have the tools or support they need, even your best employees will struggle in that kind of an environment. So before we start fixing people, I think that we have to ask whether we've designed the environment for success.
No, I agree 100%. That's exactly right. So, hey, Brooke is going to walk us through a practical framework that she's developed that leaders can use to diagnose the root cause of underperformance and then determine whether the issue is individual or it's structural or maybe a combination of both. And hey, one quick disclaimer I want to share before we go any further. When you're dealing with sensitive HR or legal matters, make sure you always work closely with your HR expert, someone who knows your organization and the laws in your state, and be sure to seek out legal counsel whenever appropriate. So with that, I'm going to turn to Brooke and ask you, Brooke, please tell us, why is it so important for leaders to really carefully diagnose what's causing the underperformance in a team or with an individual?
Thank you so much, Brett and Alan. I'm so grateful to be here and to have this conversation. This is a real passion area of mine. And I've done a lot of work in this area over the years. And one of the most common things that I find is that leaders and managers tend to underreact or overreact when it comes to a performance issue. And I think one of the key things to realize is that if you have an employee that is not performing, or you have a team or set of employees that are just not performing well, it's important to understand that that underperformance is probably more of a symptom than the root cause. And so it's very natural to want to jump in and start solutioning and doing corrective action. But what I would always encourage leaders to do is to take a moment and actually go through a diagnostic process before they decide what to do next.
Cool. Well, I have a question. When you're working with a leader, what are some of the signs that it's not really a performance issue, but maybe a hiring issue or a role fit issue?
Well, that's a great question. Role fit can actually stem from the hiring process. And so if you hire a person and you don't have a really good hiring process in place where the expectations, the experience, the skills needed for the job are very clear, you've got a good process for vetting that candidate and sourcing that candidate well, and then the process of going through the decisions involved in that hiring process. Who do you have on the team that's going to be actually involved in interviewing and helping to kind of weed out the other candidates and then come to a final candidate. If that process is not really solid and best practice, a lot of times you can end up hiring the wrong person. So
Mm,
there's an issue there that can possibly happen. So if you hire the wrong person, You can have the best organization, but that person is just not going to be a fit overall.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. So, Brooke, if you would tell us, how do you begin diagnosing whether the issue is the employee or the organization?
Yeah, that's like the $10,000 question. So, what I would always encourage managers to do is start with the individual that's involved in this performance issue. It may be one person, it may be a handful of people, but let's say in this case, it's one person on your team that you're just having a lot of issues with their performance. I would really sit down and do a very well planned, very comprehensive one on one. And it may be a series of one on ones that you need to do and really start the conversation with curiosity and not judgment. I think that the goal should be, hey, what's getting in the way of your success? What's going on? And as you start to have that one-on-one conversation, hopefully as a manager, you have built trust with them so that they can talk to you about whatever's going on. Some of the things that I ask are, what would you change about how we're working right now and why? What do you need from me to be more successful? And so you're starting to peel back the layers of what's going on while at the same time making them aware that there's some performance issues that you've noticed and you just want to understand what's going on. If seven people tell you as a manager that, hey, the priorities are changing every week, it's not a performance issue, it's a leadership problem, or it's a systems issue, or it's a cadence issue going on when you have multiple people saying the same things.
So, Brooke, help us make this practical. What are some real world examples of individual performance issues versus organizational system issues?
Yeah, and this is what you want to be listening for whenever you're having those one-on-one conversations. So, some individual issues that are really unique to that person, limited to that person would be, you've made a bad hire. There is a poor role fit. So you got a great person, but they're just in the wrong role. They're in the wrong seat on the bus. Another one that people don't think about very often is the values are misaligned. So their value system and the organization's value system either is or has become out of alignment. Also, engagement. So I'm sure most managers have dealt with situations where they can just tell that an employee used to be very engaged in their work and all of a sudden they're just disengaged. They're not really putting any level of discretionary effort forward that they used to or normally do. Another issue could be wellness. So that wellness could be, there could be a health issue, a mental health issue. There could be stress going on at home. They're caring for an aging parent. All kinds of personal issues can come into play. Obviously, you have to be careful, asking them for a lot of details about, certain information. But the reality is, if there is some of that going on, that will affect their performance at work. And then motivation. There can be situations with employees where they're just not motivated. And yes, there are situations where you just have a person who's become very lazy and they just are not motivated to do a good job.
Thanks, Brooke. Can you maybe dig a little deeper for us on bad hire and also values? I'm curious more about the values misfit.
Yeah, that's a great one. I've got a great story around that. So when I was in business school, I was part of a project team and it was an international program. And so we had people from 5 different countries on my project team. I was the only American and we had a guy from, I'll just say Europe. And his job was the project was to put together a new business plan for a business that we were going to, you know, um, invent, and we were going to go in front of a panel and pitch, kind of like, Shark Tank. And so we came up with this great business idea. Everyone had a different assignment on, what you were responsible for doing for the team. And this guy, we'll call him Anthony. Anthony from Europe, his job was to come up with the sales plan for how we were going to sell this business. And we were getting ready to go out on spring break. And so the assignment was, okay, everybody, while you're on spring break, work on your individual part and then come back and we're going to pull it all together and then we're going to present. We had a very limited amount of time. So everybody's around the table, everybody's nodding, yep, we're going to work on it over our break, come back ready to go. Well, when we came back from the break, everybody had done their part except for Anthony. And we're all sitting around the table, we have no time left to work on this. And we're asking him, Anthony, why did you not do your part? And he said, well, because I'm on holiday. Like, I'm not going to do work on my holiday. And that's a European mindset, and especially in certain countries. But, that obviously was a huge issue for our value system because we had agreed and we had given our word that we were going to do our part. And so that's a great example of where his value system of his holiday was very much in contrast to my value system of be dependable, give your word, and do what you say you're going to do and be someone that's reliable. And so I learned a very hard lesson from that experience that sometimes you cannot assume that everybody's operating with the value system when you're in a work environment.
Thanks, Brook. What about system issues?
So systems issues could be things like leadership and management, the management structure, the managers that are put into place to supervise employees. That's definitely something that an individual doesn't have any control over. That's really the responsibility of the organization to put really great leaders and managers into place, making good decisions, driving and guiding the teams correctly. Organizational systems and structures. If you think about the tools and the resources that are made available to the employees to help them be successful, the organizational structure, staffing levels, if you're understaffed because you have been put in a position where you're doing 5 jobs, it's probably going to affect your performance. And unfortunately, the employee doesn't have any control over that.
Mm.
Thanks, Brook. How about some examples of where leadership or organizational systems have an unintentionally impact the poor performance?
Well, that's a great question. One of the biggest areas that I see is very poorly planned onboarding. So, a lot of times there's a focus on the hiring process and finding the right person, and then you bring that person into the organization and you are not setting them up for success. And there's a lot of statistics and research to show that if an employee has a bad onboarding experience in the first 90 days, it leaves a lasting impression on them throughout their tenure. It probably can set them up to not stay as long because they have started their journey with the organization on a bad foot. And so I would just say think very carefully about how you're planning that first 3 months to 6 months of onboarding. Make sure that not only do you have the IT onboarding done really well to help them set up all the technology, but to also make sure they've got opportunities to be mentored and coached, assign them a buddy, give them some structured, time, informal and formal time to really learn the job and learn what's expected. I would also say, you know, this is a big area of why certain employees leave a company is they've got a bad manager. I mean,
Mm.
bad management is probably one of the number one reasons people get dissatisfied in a job. And once you lose that relationship with your manager, or maybe you've never had it, that can drastically affect your motivation to want to perform well if you don't feel like you're being led by the right person.
Mm. Mm.
And I would
Thanks.
just say even high performers are going to struggle in a broken system. So take the time to really think through what system have we put into place around this employee to make sure that they're successful.
Thanks, Brooke. Also, you mentioned, I think at the beginning of the talk about making sure you understand what the root cause is before you get into solving the problem, right? Be curious. And I like that. Be curious. So, can you help us then, if it's individual, what would be your response? And if it's a system, what would be your examples of responses?
Yeah. So if it's an individual issue, and that is the issue of the performance can be traced back specifically to that person, not a systemic problem in the organization. First of all, it's very important that you create some psychological safety with that employee. Hopefully, it's already built before there's a performance issue. But being able to talk very honestly about what's going on and whatever they're willing to share with you, that one-on-one time is very important to really uncover, can you as a manager help? Can you take some obstacles out of their way? Some organizations have employee programs that offer, you know, support assistance. So, some organizations offer counseling, some organizations offer training on how to help them manage their work better. Whatever that personal issue is going on, if it's within the manager or the organization's ability to solve it, they should solve it. Everyone goes through highs and lows, everyone goes through life. And so there's going to be those times where someone just needs a little bit of extra help. Make sure you're having good coaching feedback sessions. So if you're seeing improvement, make sure that you praise the employee and reward them with words and with recognition because they're making an effort and they're trying to work on it. But if you're not seeing an improvement, you also need to have that conversation. So that feedback loop is very important if you're not seeing that improvement. And then I would say on the systems side, ways that you can resolve that, that can become a little bit more challenging, especially if you're in a large organization, because one manager may not have the authority or the power to completely change the entire structure and system of the organization. I think that's where a manager needs to be an advocate with the higher levels of leadership. And when they start to see a trend, especially if it's more than one employee, if it's one employee, it's easy to just write it off as a personality issue or well, that person is just, they have their own issue with this company. But when you start to see multiple people struggling with the same issue, that creates a little bit more of a compelling argument to take to senior leadership and say, hey, we need to resolve this. We need to put a program into place. And sometimes the manager might be need to be willing to lend a hand in that. So, being willing to volunteer to put together a task force or a committee or a team that can build a program for onboarding or, create some additional training that might be needed for a team. I think that's where that manager can really be an advocate.
Super. Thanks, Brooke. Hoping everything goes well, but it doesn't always go well, does it? What indicators have you seen that suggest perhaps a role change or a separation may be maybe the best outcome for both the employee and the organization?
Yes. So that's a big question because then at this point you're starting to get into more of a, performance improvement situation where a higher level of intervention may be needed. You may be starting to realize that this is not working out and the person may need to be managed out of the organization. One of the things that I look for is progress and ownership. So if you are having these one-on-ones and make sure you're documenting all the conversations and you're just not seeing that improvement. The person is totally in denial there's a problem. They're not willing to take ownership of the role that they're playing in this performance issue. They're not willing to work on things, and you've really laid it out. Here's what I need to see. Here's what I'm not seeing. Here's the metrics I need you to be thinking about. If you're just not seeing the progress, that's definitely a yellow flag or a red flag that you may need to put them on a more formal performance improvement plan and possibly manage them out of the organization with love and grace. I always recommend that if you can help people lovingly, gracefully exit the organization, that's always best for you and the employee. Also, are they owning the problem? Sometimes when a manager sits down to talk about a performance problem, the employee is just deer in the headlights. They had no idea that there was an issue. So you need to always have some examples at the ready that you can share. Hey, remember last week when, you did that presentation, it just seemed like you were struggling to answer questions. It just seemed like you were disengaged or distracted. What's going on? And so have some examples, hopefully recent examples that you can give. And you're not coming at it with, an accusatory tone or a judging tone. You're just bringing them facts and insights and data and observations, and you're asking them to work with you to help solve it. If they're not willing to own solving it and help own solving it, then the leader has to honestly evaluate whether this is actually not a performance issue. It may be a fit issue. They may just not fit, or they may not fit anymore with where the organization's going.
Thanks, Brooke.
Yeah, Brooke, this has been great. You clearly have been in this space a long time because you have a lot of wisdom. And I think this has been a really practical conversation. As I think about it, the big takeaway for me is that when an employee is stuck, the leader's first move should not be frustration. It should take a moment and figure out what's going on to diagnose it. Is it a hiring issue? Is it a management issue? Is it systems issue? Like you mentioned earlier, an engagement or a wellness issue, or probably, or maybe some combination of all those. So, and I think the reason that matters is because the wrong diagnosis will lead you to the wrong solution. And then you can't train your way out of a bad fit. And you can't coach your way out of broken system, and you can't hold somebody accountable for expectations if they were never made clear in the first place. So, but when leaders are willing to slow down, ask better questions, and then look honestly at their own role in the situation, they have a much better chance of helping that employee to improve. Or on the other hand, if necessary, make a responsible decision about role fit or maybe separation. So thank you, Brooke, for all that. And I don't, if you have anything you want to close the conversation around, it's yours.
Yeah, I've loved this conversation. And thank you so much, Alan and Brett, for giving me the chance to talk about a topic that I'm very passionate about. When I decided many years ago to do this kind of work, one of the things that I was really driven by was this desire to help organizations create the best possible context for people to succeed and do well. There's nothing better than being in a role, doing work in your life that gives you energy and joy and something you can be proud of. And so employers have a really big responsibility in helping to create that. And so I love this kind of topic in this space. I think that one of the key things to think about is if you're a manager and you haven't dealt with an underperforming employee yet, don't worry, you will. It will happen. It will probably happen many times. And it's something that is experienced whether you're a team lead, a director, a C-suite, or a board. Everyone deals with this from time to time, and it's not an easy topic to talk about, but there is help out there. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that Converge Advisory Group, we do this for a living. We come alongside organizations that are having performance issues, whether it's an individual or a team and, or an entire enterprise, and we help diagnose. So if all of this sounds a little bit challenging, don't worry, there is help out there. So you can call us and learn more about us at convergeworks.com. I would just end by saying that performance it's not just about people. It's kind of like where the intersection of people, leadership, and systems all come together. And so the best organizations understand that it's really not a one-dimensional approach. It's much more of a three-dimensional approach that you have to use. And so the best organizations understand that and do it well.
Well, thank you very much.